Are we on? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this new roundtable discussion with Johns Hopkins University School of International Advanced Studies. My name is Hafid El. I am a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute here at SAIS. I'm also an executive director of the North Africa Initiative at Johns Hopkins, which is sponsoring, or both of them, SAIS and the initiative co-sponsoring this event. I welcome all of you. I see a lot of friends and experts here, and students and colleagues in the room. We still probably have more coming in. We are not exactly the best. We're not exactly Swiss here in Washington in terms of timing. So people will be scrolling in, but we have a very large audience already online. This is being broadcasted live both by SAIS and also our colleagues at the IMF. The format is a very simple, straightforward format. I will start by asking His Excellency the Ambassador of Algeria, Mohammed Hanouchi, to open up and discuss an open view. Hanouchi, my apologies. That's true. I forgot that. And we will. So he will share with us his thoughts about the region and the political economy of North Africa, the challenges it's facing. Then I'm going to turn to Dr. Jihad Assouri of the IMF. He's the director of North Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia at the IMF. And you know, I'm sure most of you who follow him and follow the IMF and Lebanon know all the discussions and talks about trying to push him to become the president of Lebanon. So you can count that if that happens, that he will be you met him here. Then we have our colleagues from the OECD. We have Marie Rosa Lonti and also Elena Francois, who will also join us after the words of Dr. Jihad, and then we'll open it to a discussion both from me and the audience here and also online. So this is the format. We should be finished in about an hour and a half. So welcome to all of you. Thank you all for your time and sharing your thoughts. Let me start with you, Your Excellency Ambassador Hanouchi. So, who is new, by the way, to Washington. This is one of his first appearances in public. So let me start with you, asking you your thoughts about the region, the challenges it's facing. Sort of any insight or thoughts that you want to share with us.
Yes. Good morning, gentlemen. First of all, I'd like at the outset to commend the issue of Dr. Hafid El, because it's not very often that in Washington we envisage the issue of integration within the Maghreb area. Maghreb area is fortunately an area which is not known except when there are problems, like in Libya, Western Sahara, Mali, etc. Otherwise, well, it's never on the spot. So I'm very happy that for once we have the opportunity to discuss the issue of integration. Given the fact that when we envisage the idea of integration in the Maghreb, we should not be confined only in economic elements. We should also talk. We are obliged to open various political and security issues regarding the Maghreb. I don't have the intention here to embrace all those aspects. Nevertheless, I will put the emphasis on some ideas, just to give you incentives, to give myself incentives. It would be useless to seek to cast the blame on the non-Maghreb coast, on a single party, as the responsibilities in this matter are very complex. We've been talking of integration for half a century, ladies and gentlemen, and we've not been delivering. I look at this issue as a collective failure. Very clearly, it's a collective failure of all governments, of all civil societies which curiously are culturally very integrated. We have the same language, the same slangs, for instance, between Morocco, Algeria, and Morocco, the same dialects, same languages, Arabic and Berber, the same political orientations, more or less, and we are not achieving, contrary to what is happening in other areas in the world. So we have to ask the question, why? It is true that over the years, we have been trying successfully to launch initiatives of operations regarding this integration, starting with partial integration and thinking of total, generous, and ambitious integration, like the one which is written in the statutes of the Maghreb Arab Union, Ummah, which refers to Ummah, the idea of nation in Arabic. So the message is supposed to be very strong here. Let's start with the beginning. The Ummah was created in 89 of last century with a very ambitious concept, on which I have to say that we agreed all countries, civil societies also that were involved, agreed on the idea of starting the economic integration, a whole integration, because at the beginning we have signed 38 treaties and agreements. Being convinced that in a couple of years in this process, we would be able to, let's say, like what happened in the European Union, we would be able to mount the momentum and then get to real integration. Unfortunately, it has proved that the conditions being different, we are not able to operate the same way, because the first problem that occurred, the issue of Western Sahara, fortunately was going to block the process starting from 94 until now. We have been stuck in this problem. Why? If we get back to the past, I remember clearly that there was a political consensus saying, let's go achieving the Maghreb Arab Union and let's forget, or let's convey the difficult issues like the regional problem of Western Sahara to the United Nations, who are enough competent in order to be etc. Given the fact that this is a global political problem that should be treated within the United Nations. And it is indeed. It's been treated within the, even though without consent, it's been under the responsibility of the United Nations. And regarding Western Sahara, I don't want here to indict or accuse anything, because it would be useless to just accuse like that. But in 94, December 94, Morocco took on itself the historical responsibility of conditioning the Maghreb Union process to solution of Western Sahara to get at its advantage. And from now, from this point, come all the difficulties. Then there was a tendency to try to bilateralize the issue of integration in the Maghreb and to reduce it into a political problem between Algeria and Morocco. Of course, we had problems in the past between Algeria and Morocco, and needless to get back to those problems, okay? They are enough known. But as a matter of fact, what remains is that the issue of integration was definitely blocked. We are stuck in a situation in which I don't know how we are going to get a breakthrough, because there is a precondition by Morocco saying, if you don't accept my conditions on how to solve the issue of Western Sahara, I'm not going to move. So under those conditions, how are you going to proceed? We've been trying to open dialogue many times, and I'm talking on behalf of Algeria, and I'm giving you facts, ladies and gentlemen. For instance, as far as I can remember, in 2005, we were embarked, Algeria and Morocco, with virtuous process of rapprochement. We had many exchanges of high-ranking delegation, ministerial delegations, and we ended up at last, a week before organizing the summit between the prime ministers of two countries, we received fortunately a notice from Morocco saying that as long as Algeria is not changing its position on the issue of Western Sahara, we are not going to continue with the. And the same situation occurred. I'm basing what I'm saying is based on facts, only facts. In 2012, during the Arab riots, okay, exactly, we went through the same process. All of a sudden, it was blocked by the fortunate initiative of Morocco saying, as long as you are not going to change your mind. Definitely, it has to be known that Algeria is not going to change its mind on this issue of self-determination. If you take the issue of Western Sahara, what are we asking for? We're just asking for a political solution based on international law. That means the right of self-determination of the Sahrawis. That's all, not more, not less. We are the only country in the region, this is sort of paradox, that is not claiming any part of Western Sahara. And we have stated very clearly, we have taken the commitment that with respect to Western Sahara, we don't want anything. What we want is stability because we are a neighboring country. We have a problem of refugees in Algeria. We don't want Algeria to be involved in a negative process of destabilization, especially that in the area of the Maghreb countries, we lack many things, but we don't lack elements of destabilization. Like there's a big problem, a huge security problem in Libya, Western Sahara, in Mali, in the region of Sahel. We have national and international responsibilities. In terms of stability, I think that Algeria has a special role to play, and we are fulfilling our duties completely, fighting terrorism, stabilizing the region, helping the Sahel countries, helping also our brotherly countries, like in Libya, in which you are playing an important role, trying to make a rapprochement between the various factions, basically factions, stop the killing, stop the crisis, and go to a reconciliation policy, which is absolutely obligatory. Okay? There is no way to escape it. So there are so many problems. This is why I started my remark saying that it could be maybe from the methodological point of view, useless to just focus on the shade of the economic aspects. My conviction, ladies and gentlemen, is that whenever there would be a solid political platform, then the integration would be talking. Then it would be able, then it would be easier, a lot easier to start a true, an authentic process of economic integration that would last exactly. I'm not saying the same that the one that happened in the EU that was based on other aspects, structural aspects, but we have the possibility in the Maghreb countries, as long as we can together set sort of solid political consensus over the necessity, first of all, of building common economy. Second thing, meeting some political problems, some that have relation with international affairs to the United Nations, especially the Western Sahara issue. Those are preliminary remarks.
Thank you very much.
I won't add more.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think you gave us a picture of the politics of the region and what is also back in Egypt. And we'll come back to unpack it a little bit and sort of understand a little bit more why is the politics becoming so difficult to break through that it's blocking the region from benefiting from very common or very basic advantages. and how also Europe and the United States have not really helped in this process, although they themselves will take advantage of some kind of an economic integration. Forget about the politics, but economy. I'll turn to Dr. Jihad Azuri of the IMF, who will give us a little bit deeper understanding of the economic dimension of the region, its potential, also the infrastructure, both politics and actual economic infrastructure that is hampered from achieving its potential. Please,
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Always a pleasure to interact with students. Look, we're discussing a topic that I think very quickly we will converge on, that this is a low-hanging fruit, is to increase regional economic integration in the member countries. We're talking about the region that has 100 million population, a region that, if we add to Egypt, it will form 1/3 of the GDP of Africa, strategically located between East and West, where competitive advantages that can be. Over time, several things are taking place in order to promote institutionally the level of integration at the Maghreb countries level, as His Excellency Ambassador was mentioning, but also broadly speaking at the African level. The recent one is the Great Africa. Therefore, from, I would say, a raison d'etre, there is a clear raison d'etre increasing integration among Maghreb countries. This will bring additional growth. We have recently estimated that this could bring on a long-term basis 1% per year additional growth. This would create a certain number of job opportunities for a region that is facing a relatively high level of unemployment, especially at this level. Therefore, in terms of should we do it, definitely the reasons are there. Can we do it? Of course, because we are in a region that shares many things in common. Why we were not able to do it? I think this is the big question. And here, I think it's important also to ask another question, is why now is important to reopen the subject. Let me start with the last one. Why now? Over the last 4 years, the whole world went through successive severe shocks, from the COVID-19 shock and its impact on populations of the world, and particularly in the region, and I will say a few words on that, to the recovery that brought with it high inflation that affected the livelihood of people, and recently the increase in uncertainty because of the war on Ukraine and the broad risk of fragmentation. What does it mean for the region itself? One is, throughout the last 4 years, we saw increasing number of vulnerabilities. And let me take a few examples. The first one is the informal sector. Informal sector used to play a role of buffer during any economic shocks. And the COVID crisis showed us that the informal sector was not, in fact, the best way of shielding low-income people. At the contrary. However, in the flip of the coin, we saw several initiatives that took place using technology in order to promote additional support even to the informal sector. The second element is unemployment went up. On average, reaching, for example, in countries like Tunisia, 17 to 18%. And the real issue is for the youth, where youth unemployment is now exceeding 30 to 40% in certain countries. Therefore, COVID crisis has increased vulnerabilities and also changed the pattern of trade and the pattern of, I would say, economic exchanges. It created new challenges, but also here it opened certain number of opportunities. The challenges that were created need to call for certain actions in order to mitigate them. Some of those challenges were access to finance, which is relatively low in the region and need to be increased. The second challenge that was created is the technology proved to be very useful, but also technology was a divide between those who have access to technology and those who don't. What were the opportunities? Globally, we saw change in the way global value chains are organized. And recently, with the risk of fragmentation, we saw change in the way regional cooperation are operating. We started talking about onshoring, reshoring, friendly shoring. And this region is strategically located. It's very close to Europe. It's the gateway to Africa. It has a very strong footprint in the Middle East and the Arab world. Therefore, from a strategic standpoint, this region has competitive advantages to provide. It has a wealthy, knowledgeable set of cultures and population that some of them are, in fact, both in certain startup industry or even in Europe, are performing very well. Therefore, you have the ingredients, you have the market opportunity because of the reorganization of the global value chains, the reorganization of trade. The third key advantage that I think it's very important is the only way to integrate Africa is to integrate North Africa. This is 1/3 of Africa in terms of GDP. And there is no way to create those links between Europe and Africa without having the barriers between North African countries removed. How difficult the job is? In fact, it's not very difficult because what is needed to be done is to remove barriers. And some of those barriers, when removed, would not, I would say, change the political landscape. At the contrary, they could become, or they could provide incentive to ease the political tensions, or you could start from another entry point. Historically, the region started thinking about integration from a political standpoint. I think using the economic angle by doing certain number of easy things. One, removing barriers, and some of those barriers led to the fact that this is the least integrated region in the world, 5% integration, much lower to Africa, where on average is 20%. Of course, if we compare to Europe or ASEAN, we're talking about 50, 60%. Therefore, we're starting from a low point. Removing the barriers will easily increase integration and create a market that becomes attractive for international investors. Two, infrastructure. The infrastructure is on national basis, well established, but cross-country needs to be developed. And this is also something that is needed because it will increase the attractiveness in using some of those infrastructure regionally and internationally. We have several strategic locations for ports, but still, when you look at the traffics between those ports, it's very limited. The same thing also applies for air traffic, etc. Therefore, removing barriers, increasing or improving the connectivity of infrastructure, increasing the connectivity of financial infrastructure to allow capital to flow between countries are low-hanging fruits that do not require an important level of investment, and the return will be much higher. Three is invest where the capital is, and the capital is the human capital in the region. I mentioned earlier, if you go to hospitals in Europe, you see that Algerian doctors, Moroccan doctors, Tunisian doctors, nurses are in fact in leading positions. Therefore, there are certain sectors, new services that can be promoted in the region. Therefore, I think removing barriers, improving infrastructure, creating a one single market type of approach, those are elements that can be activated in the short term, create jobs in a region that needs some, increase the attractiveness of this, I would say, crossroad between Europe and Africa, between Middle East and the Atlantic, And I'm sure that this in itself will change the perception on how to look at the Maghreb market. Again, I think also we should not look only Maghreb specific. We have Egypt and some of the other African countries who are Arab African countries, which also one need to think about how to increase the level of economic exchange and reduce economic barriers. Therefore, there is a long list, and I could go longer in terms of describing why this is something that is doable, beneficial. The last point is why now? I think this is an important moment, and here is my call for action. Why now is because of all what I mentioned above, because we need to create jobs, because the world is changing, because we can create jobs, and also because there are additional opportunities that are coming. And where those opportunities, one could, I would say, promote them. One, the region, we look at it as a unity. The region is different. And even in terms of economic outlook, we saw countries now benefiting from the increase in oil price. We expect, for example, in our recent research at the fund, that in the next 4 to 5 years, we should expect more than $1 trillion additional financial windfall that will come because of the increase in oil price and the reforms that are introduced in the Gulf countries. This $1 trillion of additional windfall is currently seeking investment in the region. Egypt, Jordan, and other countries Iraq are in active negotiation with the GCC countries to promote FDI.
That's 1 trillion to MENA.
To MENA,
yeah. Did you break it out for North Africa?
No, this is 1 billion that will be only for GCC.
Oh, okay.
This is additional revenues that will come for the GCC in the next 4 to 5 years. Therefore, here also, the nature of Arab integration or regional integration has shifted. It used to be very much top-down, public to public. Now I think it's getting more private to private and more in the form of private equity approach, which means that the role of the private sector is important, which also means it's very important to prepare the private sector for that. And this is also one of our key policy messages, that we need to allow the private sector to lead. And this requires reforming state-owned enterprises, improving business environment, increasing access to finance that is relatively low in the region. Therefore, allowing a new approach of partnership is one way to, in fact, benefit from all the change and transformation that we are going through and benefit from the moment. This is the why now. The second reason why now is very important is because of the recent developments, especially where the fragmentation and risk of uncertainty are going to call for changes. And some of those changes will affect the way we produce, we trade, we store, we create, I would say, even security. And this is going to allow countries like Maghreb countries to become more strategic, including in sectors that we have been neglected. The sector of agriculture. Since the war in Ukraine, we saw regain an interest in producing or manufacturing agricultural product by European companies in Maghreb countries, in countries like Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. Mauritania has a huge potential in terms of also mineral, as well as also other type of commodities that are becoming now strategic. Therefore, this is now the moment to see how this global value chain is being reorganized, how the global order, the global economic order would allow the region like Maghreb countries to benefit. And three, there is also now awakening in Africa that integration economically is the only way, especially in the next decade, to create jobs and to create growth. And as I said earlier, It's impossible to have an African integration without North African integration. The last point on why now is the fact that we see in terms of international assistance some shift because of the war in Ukraine. Therefore, you need to create more opportunities to attract investment, to attract capital, and this would require proactive policies by countries. Again, taking a different road, which I would say, practically speaking, it's an easy road, which only requires to do some measures that will reduce only the barriers that exist today, I think, and plan the medium and long term. And this is where climate, for example, becomes an important opportunity, not only a risk, because over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, the region has suffered a lot from drought, from floods, and therefore it will become a new opportunity to invest in a future that could create growth and jobs and protect population. We need to put it in a context of inclusion, because with a young region that has highly educated young population with a very limited women participation in the labor market, if you remove the obstacles for that, you could create a new dynamic that could transform the region and could have even a political positive impact, not only for the region itself, but for the whole Africa. Reducing tensions, reducing risks. And therefore, you need to look at an old story in a different way. This is an old story. The integration in the Maghreb countries, it's an old story. You need to look at it from a different angle. And I think the time now is good for that. And let me stop here.
Thank you very, very much, Jan. You never disappoint. You always have very, very key observations. There are a number of things that Jihad has pointed to that I'd like to a little bit unpack as we come back to the discussion. I've done some work on the integration both for the Maghreb and the Arab world when I was at the World Bank. And you hit on all of the key lessons we have learned in the past. I published an academic paper through SAIS a few years ago on this topic of integration. But it is, as you had mentioned, now is a good time to revisit it, given both the global and the regional dynamics. So we'll come back to some of these very key issues, and I am very particularly interested in how Jihad sort of mentioned that economic integration and the private sector approach to it can actually lessen the political challenges. So it can be, instead of being a block, it can actually help solve some of these political issues. I will turn to our colleagues in Paris from the OECD, and I would like if you can start sharing with us your thoughts on this issue, and also, if you can focus a bit on also the European dimension and the importance of North Africa to this. And one final point is, please also include Egypt, because like you had mentioned, actually our initiative here includes Egypt as a part of North Africa. So we're talking about the whole region, not the region that is defined just the Maghreb. We're looking at the whole dimension of North Africa. Please, ladies, I leave it up to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure and honor to participate in this roundtable. We're talking from the OECD, who include many of the member states of the European Union, but is in fact, the OECD is an international organization with a membership of 38 countries that span across different continents. Now, to answer your question, I will refer to two recent studies that we did in cooperation with the Union for the Mediterranean, which is an organization that covers the 27 member states of the European Union, and then 16 countries in the southern and eastern Mediterranean. And among these 16 countries, there are the countries of interest of this discussion, and in particular Algeria, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia, and Egypt, that are member states of the Union for the Mediterranean, and then Libya, that is an observer state. So that I will first share with you some reflection that we hope can fit the discussion about a study that we completed last year, no, actually in 2021, which is a report on progress of integration in the Union for the Mediterranean. So this particular union that include group of countries that include the European Union member state and then state in the Mediterranean, southern and eastern Mediterranean. And this study wanted as a purpose, and it was prepared as requested as an official document in the roadmap for action of the UFM organization. So the aim was to understand the progress of integration under different dimensions that I will now mention, since the launch of the Barcelona process, which was in 1995, that was the first step in this reinforcing the integration in the region with the aim of achieving a region, realizing peace, stability, growth, inclusive growth in this region. So we did not focus in this exercise in looking at the causes, I would say, of failure, in the sense we didn't look at why the integration did not advance so much. Also because there are many studies on that. There is, I think, the reasons are quite well known. And by the way, the ambassador, the IMF mentioned very rightly, already provided a context of why integration in the Maghreb, but then more generally is not advancing. So what we looked at is what happened and what can we say about the development and how can we measure them? What is meaningful in terms of indicators in specific aspect that would represent the integration in the region. And we focused on 5 different dimensions that you will see are economic, but not only economic dimension, that cover also other aspects. So there is trade, finance, infrastructure, in particular transport and energy, then mobility of persons, and higher education and research. And first of all, I have to say that the fact that we looked at integration in this comprehensive way, I think it's so not focusing on one specific aspect, in particular trade, which is the one most often cited, also because the experience across the world of regional integration most often are confined to the dimension of trade and do not cover few or none other aspect of the integration. So the fact that we looked at these 5 dimensions because they are part of the vision and the ambition of the Union for the Mediterranean was itself, an important element to see the development, but also why not? And I'm starting with trade, where in fact we could observe that sure we are far from the potential of integration that there is in this region, but in fact we could observe development. So in the past we observed 25 years, and the conclusion is things have evolved not only north-south, which was the major development, but to some extent also south-south in the members of the region. But also we observe development in terms of diversification of goods that were traded, and to some extent also in terms of integration to global value chain. But then what we certainly could see in this exercise, horizontal exercise, is that the lack of appropriate infrastructure and the fact that there have been development, and I'm sure that my colleague Elaine would elaborate more on that. We observed an insufficient infrastructure for logistics and transport, multimodal transport, something that would allow goods, once they are shipped from port to, so multimodal transport means ports that become gateways to reach not only special economic zones that are typically close to port, but also inland region, and very importantly, to reach research centers and universities. So, for instance, with this, we realize that it's an essential element, and I mention it because in a sense, jumping to one of the reflection, the conclusion, that one cannot only focus on reducing or eliminating tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, because there are other type of important obstacles that would in any case not allow to make progress if they are not addressed. And one of these is also the limited diversification of the industrial production in the different countries. So we observed some progress, but still there is a limit to what can be traded today, simply because in most of the country the offer is rather limited. So we looked, I mentioned before, at the aspect related to the mobility of people that include both migrants, both people that move for reasons related to employment, but also students in research. And for instance, there we looked at interesting experiences such as the circular migration, which was something that has developed quite substantially, especially north-south in the region where migrants would go for a limited period and then for specific activity, typically in the agriculture, and then go back to the camps, which in principle could be, as they say, a triple win solution approach, because for the host country, for the sending country, and for the migrant, but it was not the case because of the type of agreements that are today implemented. So these are just a few ideas that I'm sharing about this first report. And as I said, we really think that that all the elements are relevant and cannot be analyzed in a separate way if progress in integration are to be realized. And now briefly a second, a few words on a second report, and I think we can then share the link, or maybe they have already been shared with the participants. The second report is called Navigating Beyond COVID Recovery in the MENA region, and there it was a reflection on what has changed, what needs to be changed in the policy in the different countries following the COVID. To what extent there is a need of a shift in policy. I'm asked to leave the floor to Elena, because I'll to leave space for question with pleasure, and I can come back on the second study later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, because we are already about an hour in, and we need to open the floor for some discussion before our guests have to leave. So please, Elena, if you can
I will be quick.
Your thoughts.
I will be quick. Thank you very much. And a lot has been said already. So if you allow me, I will only add a bit of an investment policy perspective to this very important discussion. So as you might already know, at the OECD, at least at the investment division of the OECD, our mandate is to support governments in reforming, in strengthening their institutional and regulatory framework for investment, and to create more enabling frameworks for attracting more and better investment. So our approach is very much geared towards the sustainable development impact of international investment. And in this investment for development equation, of course, regional economic integration has a key role to play. And it's if I may, it's a two-way street. The link between investment and regional integration, because while on one hand, regional integration exerts significant and positive influence on economic growth and investment opportunities, at the same time, while more FDI and trades are much needed to build the regional bloc and to build a larger market, so to create a more attractive destination for investment. So I would very much like to echo what Mr. Azur said in terms of opportunities brought about by the COVID global crisis, in terms of nearshoring opportunities, and also about the low-hanging fruits, quick fixes, measures that could be taken at country level, actually, to de facto ease restrictions and facilitate intra-regional trade in North Africa, starting with easing or streamlining FDI and trade restrictions, which are higher in North Africa than the global average, as our studies show. We can send the link to our studies, that benchmark that shows the level of restrictiveness in each of the North African countries. But I would like to say a few words.
Yes, please share the link with us, please. We want to make
yes,
it public.
we will. I will as soon as I'm done. I would just like to say a few words about on one. Well, first, opportunities for further integration that we do see, or that my actually arise from the progressive implementation of the African Continental Free Trade area and its investment protocol, which will progressively bring member countries to bring their domestic legislations further in line with the global standards that they have collectively agreed on. And I would also like to say just a few words about a trend that we observe in North Africa in the past years, fast-paced reforms of business legislations in each of the countries in North Africa, which de facto go in the same direction and are being brought closer to global standards or so-called best practices in terms of business regulation. And it's important if we want to ease trade restrictions and create a more business-friendly environment. So it's a very positive step that we see, except for the threat of creating a race to the bottom when it comes to investment incentives. We see countries or in North Africa, sometimes competing against each other by being generous with foreign investors by providing investment tax or non-tax investment incentives. But otherwise, when you look at the trend, at the regulatory reforms that have been implemented in these countries in the past 10 years, it actually goes in the same direction. So that's a positive sign. And yes, here again, if there is a political deadlock within the AMU, I would look at the global, broader picture at continental level. And here we see a clear opportunity also for North Africa to position themselves as a key regional bloc among other regional economic communities which are more advanced when it comes to economic integration, such as SADC or ECOWAS, to cite just a couple of other areas from which an example could be drawn. And just as you mentioned specifically EU policy, but as my colleague Maria Rosa said, we cannot speak on behalf of the EU, whereas the OECD is a completely distinct organization. I would just say that here again, there might be an opportunity in terms of treaty policy and trade policy. When you look at the most recent developments of the EU investment strategy towards its neighborhood, especially the southern neighborhood, so the Mediterranean countries, and the new so-called SIFA agreements, Sustainable Investment Facilitation Agreements, that are, the first one was signed with Angola a couple of months ago, but they plan to start exploring opportunities to conclude such agreements with North African countries, and that also might be an interesting avenue for further regionalization down the road. Even so, we are at very, very early stage of this new, more flexible policy.
Thank you very, very much. The reason why I was asking about the EU dimension is because it seems to me from both the EU and the United States have interest in North Africa becoming more stable, more prosperous, maybe different. From Washington, I can tell you there is a lot of interest brewing mainly because of the Russia and China are beginning to see the advantage of the region, and as Jihad mentioned, and its importance for Africa. So the United States is sort of just waking up now to the importance of North Africa. From Europe, there will always be that interest, but there are very specific advantages: the issue of immigration, obviously, terrorism, the issue of energy. All of these dimensions are very key to the EU, and they have a stake in making sure that the region is both stable and prosperous, because that's basically the way you're going to get it done. His Excellency asked for a couple of minutes of comments, and then I will take some questions, okay?
Thank you. I'd like to get back to the debate. It looks like it's a very old debate over the integration. Okay, exactly the same problem is posed in terms of short-term measure. I remember in 2005, there was a seminar in France over the issue, the cost of non-Maghreb, exactly in the same words. I fully agree with all your relevant suggestions, Mr. Jihad. Obviously, we cannot deny the necessity to go further. But how? How can we do it? And then, unfortunately, we get back to the basic problems. The political problem, that means a problem of goodwill of the various states, including mine. How can we one day identify really the problem and discuss about what we can do together, what we will do together? We are not yet so far to this stage, unfortunately. This does not mean that we have not been achieving anything. I can give you examples, for instance, what we've been doing as Algeria in commercial cooperation with Tunis. We have a preferential agreement, trade agreement, okay, which we've been implementing with some success. And we want to go forward with Mauritania. Very recently, we have signed important and tremendous trade agreement. We want to open more, even with Libya, even under the current war circumstances. We are trying to work. Unfortunately, we cannot do that with Morocco because of the reasons you know. But we are not satisfied with the level of integration. It goes without saying, we want to do more, but how? My conviction is that we have to get back and discuss in total confidence, in total clarity, how we should get rid of the political problems in order to create the situation for economic recovery, economic integration. How? We have recently signed the Global Free Trade African, okay? Free trade, zone of free trade in Africa. By the way, all the Maghreb countries have agreements of integration, agreements of cooperation, of association with Europe, very advanced, very sophisticated. This leads me to say that we will get to a situation in which basically we'll have solved the problems, the political problems, then the issue of integration would come very easy, very simple, and we would be able to implement the fast track barriers which you talk about, Dr. Jihad. Then we would be running very quickly. But you have, unfortunately, we are stuck with a problem which we should not ignore or deny. It is here, and we have to handle it. Speaking about the EU, I was a couple of months ago ambassador to Algeria to the EU, and I would like to share with you some comments on the interest. It's true that there is a tremendous European interest for the Maghreb integration, even though in the past, when we started 20 years ago, negotiating the agreements of association, the EU did all it's possible in order, I'm sorry to state that, to divide the Maghreb countries. It would have been really relevant to go as a bloc to negotiate a global agreement, trade agreement. Okay, we were prevented from that. Second thing, speaking in terms of new policy, neighborhood policy, you know that for now, the trend, for years and years, the tendency in the EU policy has been to give a sort of preference to the Eastern countries. Now, more than ever, the focus is on Ukraine. And this leads me to ask the question of really the interest of the EU vis-a-vis the southern countries, all the southern countries, including the northern countries. In terms of what we receive in terms of investment, it's not a lot. And my personal fear is that we will receive more in the coming years. Investment. Speaking about the US interest, of course, in the Maghreb countries, even though we've been working on a bilateral basis, I think their interest is the same, work in order to ensure more stability in the region, along with the United States, in terms of stabilizing the country, particularly helping curb the terrorism tendency, because there is still persistent terrorist activities in the region. We've been working with the US along in order to curb, to eradicate the roots of terrorism, in order to stabilize the region in terms of migration. You know, migration for us is not a sort of fatality of history. Migration should be regarded as a normal phenomenon which occurred in history. I can tell you from distance that in the 40s of last century, Algeria received tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of migrants coming from Spain, for instance, during the Civil War. But today, the trend is reversed, but we should envision this aspect in two sides. The first side would be the aspect of solidarity and necessary cooperation between the North and the South. Second thing, there is a security dimension which one should not deny the necessity of, let's say, curbing the network, trafficking networks, etc. And we should work together in order to ensure that those two aspects would allow us, in a state of solidarity in the North as well as in the South, tackle this issue.
Thank you very, very much. Since we don't have a whole lot of time, I'm gonna allow the discussion to be from the audience rather than me focusing on some of the points. I think we've heard some very, very key issues here. One is the potential, the real potential on the economic side to benefit both the region and Africa and globally. I think we've also heard some of the issues strategic that can also invite support from the United States, from Europe, from other states, because there is some very strategic reasons why the integration of this part of the world economically, forget about the politics, that's not going to never happen, but on an economic level, among people, among private sector and so on, is really strategically advantageous for both Africa, Europe, and the United States, and also for others like China, its participation in the economics of the region, the marine Silk Road that is being planned, and in other areas. And I think we've heard very clearly, and thanks to His Excellency, the real obstacle here, and it seems to be, if you look at it from a larger perspective, almost trivial when you compare it to the advantages. But unfortunately, politics has always been a spoiler and never an enabler of anything, in my opinion. Now, the question in my mind is, and that's what I've been interested in, is how do you sort of either come to an agreement on a process to solve this political obstacle and allow this integration or a form of it and the encouragement of the private sector, because I've worked on this integration. It's nonsense to think that's going to come from top down. I think it's really by identifying very specific projects, linking of roads, linking of electricity, joint venture projects that allow the private sector. So removing barriers is all that you need really from governments. It's like, just stay out of our way. And I think the private sector will be able to do something on its own once the barriers are gone. And how do we explore the idea of how do you sort of either at least come to an agreement on a process to solve the political problem rather than just leave it as it is, blocking everything. I think Algeria's position is very, very clear. And I think also Morocco has a very clear position. The unfortunate part is that Morocco has put its political demands as sort of a precondition on everything else, sort of a veto to stop the whole, any economic, any, sorry?
Sine qua non.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a veto power in a sense that it's stopping everything else. So anyway, we have really some very good also colleagues joining us here. I see Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, which Mahmoud, I was hoping you're gonna be here with us, but since you are online, you can also throw us a question or a comment from your end. But let me start with the room. Bill, first of all, nice to see you. And please, Mario, after, right? Okay.
Since I haven't done it in person.
Please introduce yourself, okay?
William Lawrence, American University, 38 years working on the Maghreb. And since I haven't seen you in person, congratulations on this new initiative that's been around for a while, but we have a
few months, not much,
to celebrate it with you. So, and the last two sets of interventions prompt my two questions. But first, let me say I agree with all the comments about potential, strategy, barriers, studies, like everything I agree with. The question, and prompted by His Excellency's comment, I'm going to turn it over to Jihad to answer it. It's well known individual countries have an easier time getting concessions from blocs than blocs get concessions from blocs. So if I'm Moroccan tomato farmers trying to get accession to sell tomatoes in European markets, it's much easier for me as Morocco to get Spanish and French tomato producers to concede than it is to go in with Tunisia and Algeria and Libya and try to sell dates or tomatoes or whatever. The concessions will be smaller. So the economics question for you and perhaps the OECD folks is, how can the IMF and the EU incentivize the European Union to deal with the bloc as a bloc, right? To help Algeria, help Tunisia, to sort of deal with collectivities rather than individual countries, because individual countries are easier to make concessions to. And my question for His Excellency has to do with, even though Morocco is a monarchy and it's top down and nothing really happens without the king's blessing, there often seems to be daylight between the king and the government at certain key junctures in Algerian-Moroccan relations, where the king will sort of be in a conciliatory mode and the government, sabotages it. And it must have been blessed from the top, but why? Like, why would they even venture down these roads to then sort of pull out the rug from under themselves? And then just one last piece of the question. So I gave a speech in Ujda a couple of years ago on this, and the Peterson Institute data on 1 or 2 points of GDP lost because of
So I want to take multiple questions.
I'm just about to, on lack of integration, and the dean of the university said the entire audience is against you, and I said why? And they said because they consider all Algerians terrorists and smugglers. And I said, well, in Tlemcen they consider you terrorists and smugglers too. And who's making the case for integration here at the border, where there's huge informal trade going on constantly in gas and everything else? And the answer was nobody. Nobody's making the case to the border communities for integration, who then become an effective veto to integration across this least traded border in the world. So question for you,
Okay, let's take these questions and then we'll, I don't have my glasses.
Dario Cristiani from the German Marshall Fund. So actually a question on, I'm living in Tunisia. My impression was that, let's say, the means for regional economic integrations were motorcycles when visiting Tabarka or like Beja, more than other infrastructure. So on this, I want to ask, because it's extremely complicated to move around because of the lack of railways and all these kind of things, don't you think that maybe to start the process of economic integration one way could be to empower regional organizations, for instance, the Arab Maghreb Union, which might have a role? I remember this Trans-Maghreb Railway project that I think received some funding recently, but at some point, I know there have been some issues recently also regarding the renewal of the Secretary General, etc. But in other experiences of regional integration, like this kind of organizations, I don't want to say necessarily the experience of the European community, because it was very peculiar, like linked to war, etc. But something like this, empowering an organization that instead of being political would work more on functional things, and after that having a sort of trickle down like integration from the economic sphere to the political sphere. I would like to hear your opinion about
it. Okay. One last question and then we'll Munji,
it's good to see you. Thank you for
coming.
Munji Dawadi. I'm Tunisian, but I'm the executive director of Libyan American Alliance working on Libya. Now, given the political difficulty that Your Excellency have mentioned and the huge incentive when we talk about economics and trade, why isn't Algeria taking a more leading role, especially with countries like Tunisia and Libya, where you have no political issues? You have a huge advantage in terms of the people welcoming any steps that would be taken by governments. In Libya, we've seen Algeria kind of come a little bit late into the civil war. We've seen Haftar almost taken over Tripoli, and other countries stepping in militarily, while Algeria stayed back. Yes, there was positive statements. So what I'm saying is that why not take these easy steps to integrate or toward the integration, so we can, at least if we cannot achieve all of it, we can achieve some of it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm just going to add my observation, since multiple of you talk about transportation. My interest in integration actually came about by having a very difficult time one day to make reservations from Morocco to Egypt. And while there are flights, via Tunis or via Libya or whatever, it was much easier, a multiple option if I just go to Europe and come down. It was the easiest thing in the world. And you realize how little, even in the lowest possible fruits, in terms of potential integration.
I'm sure there was a Louage that would have done the.
I'll let your Excellency, and then we'll turn to Jihan. Yeah.
I will start with William. Okay, your question is relevant and proves that you have a precise knowledge of the Maghreb society. Now, as Algerian, I can tell you that we are not going to remove Morocco. Okay, it's a neighbor, which we have to call, we have to work, etc. I don't want to interfere in their own business, right? I notice exactly what you noticed, is that there is a sort of double standard in the language, which I resent. As far as I can tell, Algeria has been all the way consistent in terms of language with its goodwill to work with Morocco. We have never promised wonderful things and not deliver, okay? All what we say, we do it. And our wish is that we could speak the same language of clarity, the same language of sincerity, of political sincerity, in order to achieve in favor of the Maghreb. This is what I wanted to say regarding this issue. Now, regarding the other issue of empowering regions or regional institutions, in order to build the Maghreb, I would like to recall that regarding the railway, maybe the few things that is working is the railway. We had the railway, Maghreb railway, okay, from maybe from Marrakesh to Tunis, okay, not to Libya, I don't think so, but we had it work, okay.
Maybe Gabes or Gafsa.
Yeah, it was that Gabes. I agree with you that there is a necessity to empower the regional institutions in order to give substance to the Maghreb Arab Union. Regarding the relevant remarks of Mr. Munji, I agree with you. Algeria did not at the outset want to physically interfere in Libya. Why? Because of the atmosphere of war. Libya was in war. Okay, we have denounced the proxy war organized by foreign countries and foreign forces, and we've been, if I can say so, the only country that has started very clearly condemning all foreign interferences, including the interferences of the presence of foreign forces, non-state forces in this country. Regarding the political process, we have tried with all possible means to convince all the stakeholders in the two conferences of Berlin, as well as other conferences, of the necessity of helping the Libyans together and set the political situation, political settlement, given the fact that in Libya, unfortunately, there is a lack of, I'm not saying awareness, lack of, let's say, political society. And this is not an insult to Libya.
Let me add to this. Since I'm a Libyan, I can insult myself.
No, no.
There is a lack of everything.
Yeah, we have to, there is no political party structures as we see them logically. Yeah. And this is, it makes it very difficult to convince all the parties to come. There are very good personalities, very good patriotic personalities in Libya, no doubt. Regarding the political parties, it's yet a job to be done. This has made very difficult the task of Algeria. And add to that, that we did not want to militarily interfere because it's not our doctrine, line of doctrine. We will never do that, okay? unless special conditions occur. And I would like to recall in this context that President Tebboune, like you
Yes,
underlined,
yes.
our president, when he was elected, okay, and Libya was on the brink of falling under terrorist groups, he said, should Libya, we would never allow Libya to fall under the terrorist groups. That we will never do. But it was a red line. Thanks God that we did not cross.
He
Because
used actually the word missionary,
exactly.
mercenary, which he was basically talking about the Russians as they became right on the borders of the capital. So he,
Ambassador referred to them indirectly.
what we've been doing consistently, even though some of our partners were not very happy with our formulation, we are absolutely against. We are the only country that has underlined clearly that it is against all foreign forces, which means including mercenaries, including not only mercenaries, but private groups coming, for instance, from the previous Sudanese opposition.
Janjaweed,
Okay,
yes,
there are
Janjaweed.
groups, okay, special groups interfering from Chad, for instance,
Yes,
from the Tubu area. No,
yes, yes.
yeah. So it's really a mess, which makes from many countries. Add to that the proxy war organized by foreign countries, brotherly countries, fortunately. So,
Not so brotherly.
no, how can you under that circumstances try to organize? I think that President Tebboune was very wise, calling upon the international community to stop the aggression, the military aggression against Tripoli. Alhamdulillah, it was blocked. And we've been very active now in order to, let's say, push towards a national reconciliation of all the Libyan tribes and the Libyan parties also. We think it's important. We think it's very important in order to pave the way for elections, presidential elections and parliamentary elections, inshallah.
Jad, I don't know if you still remember the comments. I'm just going to add on top of that. It's the same dimension. I haven't heard much on the issue of the environment. Arguments for integration, since the weather doesn't stop at any border, so you cannot tackle it as a national issue. It has to be regional and global. And how do you see that, since this part of the world, as long as with MENA as well, is one of the really most affected regions of the world? How does that affect both the thinking about integration, and how can a coordinated sort of effort led by the international community can help in doing that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for those very interesting comments. Let me organize my response in 4 points. 1, political; 2, economic; 3 is about the process and what institutions like us and OECDs could do. Politically speaking, I very much agree. This is an important issue that has prevented the region from moving forward in terms of integration. However, I think organically there is further integration that we think. If you go to the border between Tunisia and Libya, or between Tunisia and Algeria, you see integration that is happening at an organic level. Politically speaking, also, I saw other experiences whereby removing political barrier or changing the political mindset can have a big impact. I give you an example that is not from the region. Uzbekistan used to be outside, I would say, its region in terms of political and economic relationship for decades. And in 2017, new change in government, new team came in, and the only decision was, we want to open up. Without doing anything other than that, the level of intra-regional trade or trade between Uzbekistan and neighboring countries have increased on average by 30% over the last 2 years. Therefore, it tells you that definitely the political impulse make a big difference. The second thing is, yes, it's easy to close border when you have 5% intra-regional trade. But when you reach 50% regional trade, it becomes very difficult. And this is why, European politicians are forced to coordinate, cooperate more than politicians in Maghreb countries, because what you have at stake or the pressure that you are to face is much bigger. 3, related to politics, it's a process. Nobody can achieve a change of this magnitude overnight. And therefore, we need to put things in a timeline and in a process. And the last point on the political, I would say, heading is recently I see some changes. The Arab League summit in Algiers was an important step, first time since COVID, where head of states have met, discussed issues of regional interest. There will be another one on economic issues in Mauritania at the end of the year. And I very much encourage Maghreb countries to seize this opportunity to promote better the Maghreb region to the entire community. By doing so, you become more relevant. And this is, for example, recently the summit that happened here between the US and Africa also provided for some of the North African countries the opportunity to showcase why important this part of and why strategic this part of the world is, because it will have huge negative or positive impact in terms of migration, in terms of growth, in terms of security, in terms of stability, but over and above in terms of economic opportunities for everyone in the world. Therefore, I think I fully agree that politics is going to be very important, but I think we need to shift the narrative, and we don't need to hug each other. We need to start politically, rationally, remove some of the barriers. Economically, what is being hindering the intra-regional trade is little. And I think both my colleagues from OECD and my colleagues from the fund who did recently a paper on Maghreb integration are showing that with only small changes, you can have high return, okay, in terms of job creations, in terms of growth, in terms of investment opportunities. And it's not only about the state. And here also my plea is to the private sector, especially the large private sector. Also, we need to see more dynamism from the investors community to look at the region and also to think regionally. Therefore, the state has a role to play, the politics has a message to send, but I think also the business community has an important role to play to, I would say, take the lead on that. Institutionally, what institutions like us and others could do is first to show the roadmap. And I'm very happy to see that my colleagues have highlighted certain number of important steps that could happen. We will be having a paper on trade integration in Africa that will be presented at the annual meetings that are taking place in Maghreb country, in Marrakesh this October. This is going to be an important moment for the whole Maghreb countries to have a platform to promote the potential. Therefore, those, I would say, analytical contributions, the role is to shed light, to a bit give a roadmap or to propose a roadmap, okay? You mentioned the issue of climate. This is an important issue. Again, we recently did a work on adaptation that showed that over the last 3 decades, a lot of hardship, a decline in inclusion was because of climate issues. And therefore, those are by nature cross-country projects, and they can force regional cooperation. Therefore, let's focus on those. We at the fund, we will have a new initiative called Resilient and Sustainability Trust that will focus on that exactly and will promote investment in long-term transformation. Therefore, let's focus on those. And again, where the world is heading to requires to have, I wouldn't say a shift in the paradigm, but adaptation of paradigm. Regionalism is back, or at least we need to think regionally, and we need to think how we can create opportunities in the neighborhood. Over the last 3 decades, opportunities were spread all over the world. COVID and what came after is telling us that you maybe need to look at your neighbors. Europe is looking at growing wheat in Tunisia. This is something new. they are looking at strengthening strategic cooperation in terms of energy, not only getting gas, but developing all kinds of industries around energy with Algeria. Therefore, those are opportunities that they come at the moment. If you seize the moment, you will materialize a dream. And you are a senior fellow for Ibn Khaldun Strategic Initiative.
Well, it's now called the North Africa Initiative.
Which is, I think, Ibn Khaldun is someone who wrote on these issues, and going back to his writings will help us see the future. Therefore, again, I think not because something that has been relevant did not materialize, it means that it is not valid anymore. It's still valid. The only element that I think, maybe because we are Friday and heading to a weekend, I'm maybe ending on a positive note, that sometimes hard things need an opportunity, and the opportunity could be small signal. I see a signal.
Well, that's really very positive.
I like that.
I'm going to give the floor to our colleagues in Paris to very quickly give us their final thoughts, and then I will conclude the event and with thanks to everybody. Please go ahead.
We cannot hear you.
I think you're muted.
Okay, well, apparently Maria Rosa has an issue. Okay.
No, because I could not unmute myself.
Okay.
Yes, I would just follow up on the last consideration and about shifting the narrative, and I think this is very important. But also something that has not yet been mentioned is communicating about the benefits, because I think if we consider the recent experience in the European Union and what happened with the Brexit, this became quite evident.
We are doing one now on Africa.
There was really a lack of understanding at all the level of the society, including in the political class, about what exactly an integration would mean, what are the benefits, the implications, and I think, I'm not saying that this is the only element that would unblock the political part, but I think there is an important work to do in making it much more evident and known at the general level what an integration means, and in particular all the advantages in terms of potential for stability, addressing new emerging global challenges, generating more growth, employment. So I think I fully agree on that, and I would really insist on this change of narrative and communication. And last point is that the OECD, the way we support this change in the political process, and it was said very clearly, there is up to a point on which an external actor can influence, is to create opportunity for dialogue, to sit at the same table and to share best practices, to share challenges, but also ideas on solutions that have been applied in a country of the region or in other part of the country across the world. And we have at the OECD and specific MENA competitive programs, for instance, where there are several working groups where all the countries in the region, in the MENA region, participate, and we discuss private sector development, we discuss traded investment, we discuss in the issue of in the business integrity. So I think creating opportunity to discuss and exchange is something that can make a change. I'll leave Elaine.
Yeah, and if I compliment on what you're just saying, Maria Rosa, indeed, we do act as the OECD as a facilitator for global policy dialogue. And here, I would like to jump back to a previous comment that was previously made on how to focus on the economic dimension of regional institutions. And well, I would suggest looking closer at the example or the model of ASEAN, which is quite an interesting and somehow successful model that's really focused on the economic dimension of regional integration. And one last comment is about the multiplicity of regional economic communities and regional agreements where while I was reading a little bit before this discussion, I was looking at the myriad of overlapping trade and investment treaty commitments taken by North African countries, and also like membership in several RECs. And I was wondering, I mean, it's an open question, I don't have the answer. I was wondering whether it was actually a good thing to boost regional integration or whether it was creating an excessively complex landscape for trade and investment regional rules. Thank you.
Can they hear me now? Okay. Thank you all very, very much. Let me just conclude with few words. First of all, of really sincere thanks for His Excellency, for Dr. Jihad, for our colleagues from Paris. It's really a joy to have you here share your thoughts and your experiences on the region. The topic, as you can all tell, is an important topic. I think it's an increasingly going to be getting more attention. Unfortunately, we all know politics will only help when it comes in an advantage to them. And I think there is a strategic now political advantage for the United States, for Europe, as I said, to try to help in this process. I think Jihad's pointing out to some of very practical entry points that are low-hanging fruits is a very key suggestion. We will be hosting in the future other events, and we will be hosting the ambassadors of the various countries on North Africa. So I invite all of them to also think of us. We will be happy to host events on the region, any visiting scholars or officials. They should consider this initiative really as a home for them to sort of air some of these topics out, and especially on the US relationship with the region, which is something that our students and faculty here are second to none in terms of their expertise. This is one of the highest ranking colleges in the world when it comes to international relations. So we want to do that. We will be hosting His Excellency separately in the future, as well as Dr. Jihad, on a much larger scale, I hope. So I want to thank you all, especially those who took the trouble of coming all the way here and going through our building. Next time is going to be a much nicer, a fancier building. We just, as you know, we are renovating the museum right next to the Capitol building. And it's going to be our headquarters. So by next year, you'll come into a much fancier campus. This is, I think it served its purpose over the decades. Yes, all sites and parts of Johns Hopkins from Baltimore. August is the final, but I think it starts off from the spring, April, May. We start moving some of our stuff, but we will have better facilities for conferences, for sort of bringing together voices across all of the topics we follow. Thank you all very, very much. And I'm happy we are not really that late. So, so it's a very good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.